Hello, everybody. I'm Derek Arden, and welcome to Monday Night Live. I joined Barclays on the 5th of September 1966, and I thought I was going to stay for 3 weeks, but I actually stayed for 33 years. My dad marched me down to Barclays in Harlesden, even where the rats carry flick knives, Harlesden, northwest London, and made sure that I went for the interview, and it was a very interesting time. I actually first met Andrew. Buxton when he interviewed me for an assistant manager's job. He actually turned me down. I don't think he can remember that, but when you're a leader, you do make some wrong decisions from time to time. Um, Next time I met Andrew was when I was the account director for Tesco's, and I was summoned to bring the chairman of the bank along to meet the chairman of Tesco's because they were a bit upset with the charges on their accounts. And we went along to Cheshunt, which is a pretty undistinguished place in North London. And there were four of them one side of the desk, and there was Andrew and I, and it was a little bit like what I call the Trump tactics of negotiation. They were used to getting their own way, and we weren't going to give in to them. Andrew, thanks for joining Monday Night Live. It's a real privilege to have you with us, and congratulations on all the things you've done, chairing Barclays and chairing another number of other companies. Andrew, if you wouldn't mind, give us a quick snapshot of your life.
Help. Well, I was uh, born in 1939, so I'm just about to be 86. And the first big event really in my life was that my father was killed in the 1939-45 war. And then my mother married again after the war, a Scotsman who had a big influence on my life. Firstly, because he was a director of Barclays Bank and he encouraged me to join the bank. And secondly, because actually I married his goddaughter. So that those were two big events through my stepfather. Um, I went to university. I worked for UNESCO for a short time before I started work for Barclays. Um, I drove out to Bangkok actually to work for UNESCO from London, which in 1962 was considered quite adventurous. Um, and looking back, actually, it was a very fortunate thing to do because in those days you just drove up to a frontier and drove across. Um, you know, you didn't have to have visas. They stamped them at the border. Um, and it was a good experience. And I then started work for Barclays. And maybe I wasn't adventurous enough, but I stayed with Barclays all my life, and retired officially in 1999. Actually stayed for another 5 years after that, doing various jobs. Um, and I took a particular interest in the Middle East, and built up a business in the Middle East as a result. Uh, and since then have done a variety of things. I chair an IT testing company called Test House, whose owner is on the call tonight, which is a nice IT company that has grown with the testing business, uh, which is a business that has really come about in the last 25 years. And I do one or two other consultancy jobs, usually for friends who are in trouble in some way, because I don't actually look for business. So that keeps my brain going.
Brilliant. You don't look for trouble then.
I don't look for trouble, but some of it comes my way.
It must have been a huge responsibility being the managing director and then the chairman of Barclays. How did you cope with it?
Well, I honestly don't know, Derek, because it came my way, and you cope with it the best you can. Um, I think the people who really suffered as a result of my job were my family. And I've always rather regretted that. that when you reach the top of a large company, it is 100% job 7 days a week. Things can happen anytime, particularly in a big international company like Barclays. Um, and, you know, that does affect the family. There are some advantages, obviously, to the family, but I think personally, um, you don't notice that it is taking over your life. You just do the job as best you can. If you're interested in it, as I was, um, I suspect that my stepfather, who, as I said earlier, was a director of Barclays, uh, encouraged me to join the bank and also encouraged the interest in economics and banking just by home talk. Um, so I was doing something I enjoyed, uh, even if it was jolly hard work. But of course, it's going to be hard work. You know, you're putting your whole life into something that you enjoy.
When you were working 24/7 for Barclays, were you like Mrs. Thatcher, who allegedly only needed 4 hours of sleep a night?
Oh yes, I probably met Mrs. Thatcher 2 or 3 times. Um, I was always rather wary of her because she thought she knew more about banking than I did, which in my view wasn't true.
And while we're on that subject, I understood in those days that if a bank had a problem or was in trouble, that the you used to get a phone call. The chairman got a phone call from the governor of the Bank of England, asking him to come round and have a cup of tea, and that was a warning that you were in trouble. Did that ever happen to you?
Um, I wouldn't say it happened exactly like that, but of course I met the governor quite regularly. That was part of the business, and there were probably 1 or 2 occasions when he was questioning what we were doing, and he has every right to do that. Uh, I actually served under I thought, a brilliant governor, Eddie George, who was a life Bank of England employee. I think he left what did have some time out of the bank, but basically his whole life was the Bank of England. He understood markets, understood banking, and I thought was a brilliant governor.
Now we were talking about negotiations when we met last week, and you told me that one Friday night, I think you got a phone call saying that Barings Bank was in trouble and you had to spring into action. Can you share any of that with us?
Yes, well, that's been recorded in books. That I was actually at home in Suffolk, having a dinner party at home. We had a party for the weekend, and I got a call from Oliver Stocken, the finance director of Barclays, that during dinner, that he'd been rung by the Bank of England to say that Barings were in trouble. I didn't believe it, quite honestly, when I took the call. Barings was a good name. I had no idea they were in trouble. Um, but then during Saturday, a lot of investigation was going on in Singapore in Barclays, and the Bank of England called a meeting on Sunday to see whether a rescue could be organized. And I went up. I drove up to London on Sunday morning to a meeting with the Bank of England. Um, uh, as an aside, actually, I happened to appear on television later that day, coming out of the Bank of England, and my wife said, "You will never go to a Bank of England meeting again dressed in a jersey and jeans," which is what I was on that Sunday morning. But what the Bank of England was trying to do was organize a rescue by the time New Zealand opened, the New Zealand market opened on Monday morning. In fact, we didn't manage that. I actually ended up chairing that meeting, which was basically a meeting of all leading banks in the City of London that were British, not foreign banks. Um, and we did at one stage have a rescue, but out of the bottom drawer in Singapore kept coming worse and worse bits of paper found by Price Waterhouse. And in the end, the rescue failed, and uh, it, Bearings went bust.
Now that was Nick Leeson's doing, wasn't it? Could
That
one?
was Nick Leeson's. I mean, basically, it was a management failure at Bearings. They thought that Leeson was making huge amounts of money. It turned out to be fraudulent, um, and they obviously didn't have the right checks on shipping capital out. They'd shipped a huge amount of capital out to back what Leeson was doing without actually really questioning why it was happening. They were so carried away by the fact that they thought that it was the best thing since sliced bread.
And that's, I guess, greed and profit. Do you think something like that could happen again with all the computer systems in a world of artificial intelligence?
Yes, of course. Yes, of course it can, and it happens at all level. Not just in banking. Companies overreach themselves because they're carried away by a particular project, borrow too much money, um, and get into difficulties. I mean, I've seen that happen many times in my banking life.
I was just wondering with, new systems and controls and AI, whether,
Yes, but
those days are gone.
management can overrule the controls if they, if and they do. That's what happens. Or the company hasn't got enough controls. There are plenty of examples of that happening.
Mm. Now, we discussed the other. I asked you what the most difficult negotiation you'd ever been in, or the most exciting one, and I think you mentioned Massey Ferguson at the time. Can you share
Yes,
something with us?
I was involved in trying to rescue Massey Ferguson, which actually was an interesting case because this was early 1980s. I can't remember exactly when it was, but I think it was early 1980s. Um, Massey Ferguson was dominated by particularly a particular family, and they wanted to keep control and borrowed too much money as a result because they borrowed rather than raise capital. And then there was a downturn in the market, and they were very exposed. And there were about 100 banks around the world involved, and in Barclays we ended up as one of the leaders of trying to get a rescue going, which actually was in the end successful. I mean, Massey Ferguson was a wonderful company, got into difficulties. It needed bank support to get out of those difficulties, and some of that debt had to be converted, but there was a way out. And I remember uh, banks formed themselves into country groups. I remember going to Rome and meeting a lot of Italian banks. I went to France to meet a number of French banks. Um, and on the other side, there was a big argument going on with the Americans, who were led by Continental Illinois, which ultimately went bust. Um, and we convened a meeting of 100 banks or their representatives at the Dorchester Hotel and thrashed out a rescue. Um, but it was quite dramatic while it was going on.
And you're obviously a great advocate of eye-to-eye meetings because now everyone wants to negotiate via email or on Zoom. But to me, there's no substitute for meeting someone in a room, face to face, shaking their hands and eyeball to eyeball.
Well, I quite agree, actually. I mean, meetings online have their place, and it's now an essential part of management. But there is nothing like actually meeting somebody face to face, um, seeing body language, and really getting the feel of a negotiation, particularly if it's very difficult.
And clearly you support it's much easier to persuade people face to face, like I do.
Well,
Always
yeah,
encouraging my clients that I work for to go and see them. And if they don't want to go and see them, I'll go with them. But
yeah,
just for that bit of moral support.
absolutely. And um, but particularly internationally now, it's not maybe not possible to meet. And anyway, there are quite a lot of meetings where actually face to face is not necessary, and internet meeting actually is appropriate. But the important thing is to actually meet, actually, rather than just exchange emails.
I remember going with you once to Harrods. I don't know if you remember this. We didn't talk about this last week, and we were summoned by Mr. Fayed's brother, I think, to go there. And all I can remember is these very attractive women serving tea and coffee for us, and Mohammed Fayed coming in for about 2 minutes to shake your hand.
Yeah, I remember that. But you see, I was, I mean, at the time I was heading up international business, and the big corporate business, and I did believe in actually seeing the customers. I spent a lot of time going around our customers, meeting them, and I also acted as a grandfather of relationships. So you would have actually dealt with a number of companies, and some of those I would have grandfathered, so that at least I had a contact with the chairman or the chief executive if there was any difficulty.
Mhm. Absolutely. In fact, one of the unique selling points of corporate division where I work was to take the introduce the chairman or the chief executive to the company, and very often you could close a sale just on that basis because the other banks or the other companies or whatever whoever's watching this didn't do things like that. And status counts in sales. So
Well, I suppose that my background as head of international corporate business uh, stayed with me even when I was the chairman. That's the side of the business I really enjoyed.
we've talked about fraud and bugging on this program with one or two people. Andrew, I heard that the Barclays boardroom was swept for bugs at 9 o'clock every morning by a security company. I wasn't sure whether I believe that or not, but there were a lot of hostile takeovers going on at that time. Can you deny or confirm that for me?
Quite honestly, I have no idea, Derek, whether that happened, but I wouldn't be surprised, actually. I do think that large corporates do need to take uh, that sort of action, just in case. I mean, there is a risk, isn't there? Um, and I think it's wise to do that sort of thing.
Anyone that's been in walk down Mayfair will see all those shops that sell all sorts of surveillance equipment, and
Yes.
you will see all sorts of different people, dodgy people going in and out
Well, I
buying.
do think one needs to be uh, cognizant of the risks that come out of a meeting and discussion of very sensitive things. I mean, look what's just happened in the White House.
Absolutely, absolutely. I was working on a hostile takeover for Granada when they were buying Forte hotels. And I remember Jerry Robinson, the chief executive of Granada, saying to me, "You guys better hurry up with this debt because there's potentially 1,000 people in the city that know of this, lawyers and accountants, and the share price is beginning to move for some reason." Uh,
Yes.
Interesting times.
Yeah. I'm afraid that that's always been a risk and will continue to be a risk.
Mm. Chinese walls. I was never sure about Chinese walls in the city, but for those that are watching, a Chinese wall is where a company or a bank erects a wall, in theory, between different sides of its business when it has a conflict of interest.
On the whole, I think the City of London is pretty good at keeping secrets. But there are occasions when there is a breach. But when you think of the number of deals going on around the city, I think confidentiality is generally kept.
I guess it's it becomes more difficult now, I think, doesn't it? Because of what's happened in the White House with Trump and WhatsApp. It's nothing secret, is it? And computers can go back and catch anything.
I've just read a remark from somebody saying that Chinese walls lead to Chinese whispers. Yes, I suppose they do.
Well, I haven't seen you're looking at the chat box. Yeah, yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, yeah. No, that's from Andrew Green. Um, how do you think things have changed in the last 20 or so years since you stepped down as being the chairman of a major global bank?
Well, the main thing that has changed is information flow. Um, that information now is instant. It didn't used to be. Um, uh, you know, internet, mobile phones. Um, People now expect instant information. Um, we thought at that time, when I was at Barclays, that we had pretty good information, but nothing like actually what happens now. I also think that we live in a much more transparent world. Um, I mean, I, I'm not sure I would like to be head of Barclays now, where the pressure coming from the Treasury, the Parliament, the members of the Treasury Committee, the press, um, you know, the, the pressures are very, very great and very instant. And it just puts more pressure on the management.
With your huge experience and your huge wisdom of life, what tips would you give younger people now in 2025 as
God,
they
that's a
enter
big
their
one.
career or their midlife career or whatever?
Well, first of all, I think that you should do something that you really enjoy if you're going to have a career. And it doesn't matter if you want to go and be a game warden in Kenya or something like that, or opt out, or on the other hand, go into the city or be a vet or whatever you want to be. But do something that you enjoy and then stick at it. Um, be straightforward, stick at what you want to do, at least for a time. I mean, we live in a world now where people seem to move their job really very easily and very quickly. I tell my grandchildren that they've got to stick a job for 3 or 4 years to see whether they really enjoy it. And if they don't, then try something else. Um, but and the other thing I would warn anyone, which I've referred to earlier, is that the effect on your family of senior management can be quite great. I mean, I was very lucky in having a wonderful, supportive family, um, but I recognize in hindsight the pressures that came on them.
Did you ever feel scared or threatened in your job in Barclays at any time? I can remember one or two customers trying to squeeze me to lend them money.
Um, I don't think so. I think that's something that comes with the job, and you customers, um, if they have a project, believe very strongly in that project. Um, there's nothing wrong with that. They ought to. But you're sitting there in judgment as to whether, and sometimes you'll get it wrong. I mean, Barclays had bad debts as a result of actions that I took. I recognize that. But on the other hand, there is a saying in banking that if you don't make bad debts, you don't lend any money. And what you've got to do is make sure that the bad debts are small enough to make sure your business makes a good profit. But banking is all about risk, and you must take some risks. Um, and you're judging what risk to take.
We're nearly out of time, Andrew, and it's been fantastic talking to you. I just wonder, one last question. I wonder if there's something you know now that you wish you'd known at when you were 30 or when you took over as chairman even. I'll let you choose.
Well, when I got married, originally, my first wife died about 10 years ago. But when I married her, this was 1965, so I was 26. I told her I wanted to be a farmer. And then gradually the bank took over. Um, I've always slightly regretted that I misled my first wife when I married her. She she thought she was going to have an idyllic life in the countryside farming, and actually in the end she had a whirlwind business life, married to a senior executive of Barclays. It was rather different.
You must have been the last chairman of Barclays that started in Barclays. Do you think that was a good thing? I mean, now bank chairmen are headhunted from all over the world and last 3 or 4 years if they're lucky.
Well, I found it very useful that I understood how the nuts and bolts of the bank worked. I mean, I started my life behind the counter at Holland Park in West London, um, and moved around for about 5 years in different jobs, including working in the United States for a time, and then finally settled in East Anglia as a local director, which was effectively a area manager. And all through my life, I was pleased that I'd worked in the bank low down, and I understood how everything worked. It was very useful.
Fantastic, Andrew. Thank you so much for joining us on Monday Night Live. And I'd ask members of Monday Night Live to give you the usual round of applause in the normal Monday Night Live way. Will you stay on and join us for questions, please?
Yes, I will. Yes, certainly.
Thank you very much indeed. Thanks everybody for watching Monday Night Live. Leaders from all over the world, and tonight we've had the chairman of one of the largest global banks. Thank you for joining us.